So this video is going to explain what is known as the circle of confusion. The whole lens design element of this class has been called the circle of confusion, but actually it's a very real thing. And it's something that explains why aperture has an impact on depth of field. In this photograph, we can see that this little shape in the background here is relatively sharp compared to the main point of focus. In this shot, we can see that it's far more out of focus in the background. And the impact of depth of field that we're seeing here, aperture is the key element. Of course, we know that there are 5 things that impact depth of field, but right here we're going to learn why aperture impacts depth of field. Okay, so get your notebooks out. I'm going to struggle to draw in Photoshop. It's not going to be the best, but a standard cross-section of a lens as we start to make all of these drawings is going to look like this. A single lens element or simple lens representing the whole optical system, a compound lens or a lens that we would have on the front of our camera. The line here designating the focal plane. This symbol is pretty familiar or should be to everybody, and this lens, the center line of the lens, or the axis, AXIS, and you can label that on this diagram too. Now, imagine that we're photographing somebody standing here, and they're looking directly to the camera, and then in the background there's a tree. This is not going to be a very good tree, but imagine that this is a tree in the background that we're seeing here. Okay, back to our thinking of light. Light emits from a single source in straight rays, straight lines, and it bounces off of the things that we see, and it bounces off in every direction. And some of that light that is bouncing off the things that we see is going to hit the front element of our lens. It starts from a single pinprick of light that spreads out. This is where it gets confusing, but let's make some drawings and hopefully it can start to make sense. So imagine we're focusing on the man's eye or the person's eye. Those rays of light are coming out. We've got from the center of this person, those rays of light are coming out in straight lines, and they are coming into focus at the focal plane here. These should all be straight lines. Obviously I'm doing it freehand, so it's a bit of a mess, but what we're seeing is the rays of light are spreading out as they bounce off of the person that we're photographing. They hit the front element of our lens that refracts or bends those rays of light and brings them to a single point, and that single point or pinprick of light needs to be on the focal plane. Before it actually gets to that pinprick of light, it's seen as a disk of light, and that disk of light gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we focus our lens, and that disk of light is what's known as the circle of confusion. Okay, let's take the same thing from our tree in the background. We're focused on the person in the foreground. The rays of light are coming out from the tree and hitting our lens, but actually those rays of light are coming into focus behind the focal plane back here, and that is a really critical thing to understand. So they're coming into focus somewhere up here, but at the focal plane we can see that actually that's a wider area that we're looking at here. And if we were to look at the focal plane square on, so imagine this line here is now designated by this box here. So this pinprick here we can see in the middle as a single dot of light, but if we imagine the tree at this point, this is a disk of light. And so on our diagram we can say focal plane, and we're imagining that this is with a wide aperture, and we can call this, let's say this is f2, 2.0. So focal plane at 2.0, and it looks something like this. The point that we're in focus on is a pinprick of light. In the background, the tree would come into focus way behind the focal plane, but at the focal plane, it's a disk of light and it's a circle around like this. All right, I know this is confusing, but let's imagine that we've stopped this lens down. So I'm going to redraw this diagram. You could overdraw the diagram, but I think it's going to be confusing to do that. So again, we'll do our diagram here. But this time, we're going to imagine that we're at f16. And so we've stopped down our aperture to this point through here. I'm going to take out the axis of the lens because I think it's going to be easier to see the impact of what we're talking about if I take that out. Okay, let's redraw the diagram with the tree and our person that we're photographing. And so imagine we're photographing the same person through here. They can still be waving. Two eyes, a tree in the background. Doesn't quite look like a tree, but we've got to imagine that it's a tree in the background. Drawn very, very quickly. Rays of light are coming off of this person, and they're hitting the front element of our lens. But this time, it's at a smaller aperture. And so for the person, well, it's going to come into focus at exactly the same point, and that is going to appear as sharp. But the difference is going to be at the tree. So imagine this is a single pinprick here. Those lines are not very good. That should be a single line that comes very, very sharp there. Off of the tree, those straight lines coming into focus behind, in the same place behind the focal plane. But this time, the disk of light here is going to be relatively small compared to what it was on the previous diagram. So if I draw this square again, this is the focal plane at f16. f16. Our main point of focus here remains a single pinprick of light, but the circular confusion, the disk of light, is smaller than it would be on the image at a wider aperture. And because it's smaller, that is going to be seen as a slightly sharper image. I hope that makes somewhat sense. Well, we'll get back in the classroom and we'll go through these things again in more detail and answer some of your questions. If you're completely confused, try watching the video again. If you're still completely confused, email me and well, we'll see what we can do. All right.